success as a whole, whether that's in sport or in business, one thing that I like to share with people is, there's hard work, there's dedication, determination, there's having a grandiose vision, one that's bigger than oneself. But people always say there's a thing of luck. And I do believe that luck plays a part, but it's about creating that luck, about putting yourself in the positions to be lucky. And I think that has been part of the magic sauce, if you will, that has put me in positions to succeed.
Hey, Mile 40 fam. Today's podcast episode is brought to you by the leaders in male grooming at Manscaped. They're helping us spice up the hair care regimen on our heads with something fresh. No, it's not a new razor. It's not ball deodorant. Get ready for the game-changing new Scalp Buffer by Manscaped. Let's break down why you need to add this bad boy to your hair care routine. First things first. Check out these thick silicone bristles. They're 100% antibacterial. No more germs hitching a ride on your head. The bristles gently exfoliate your scalp, and the product helps reduce flaking caused by dry skin and buildup. The bristles enhance shampoo penetration for more foam and less product juice. It's not just about feeling good. A better lather means better cleaning power. You can also pair it with the 2-in-1 shampoo and conditioner from Manscaped for the ultimate hair care routine. These products are designed to work together, giving your hair the nourishment and strength it needs. Simply put, the Scalp Buffer is your scalp's secret weapon. Its antibacterial silicone bristles keep your scalp healthy, maximizes shampoo performance, gives you a soothing massage, kicks bacteria to the curb, and stores away like a champ. Take your scalp from zero to hero with the Scalp Buffer. Get 20% off plus free shipping with the code MILE40 at manscaped.com. That's 20% off plus free shipping with the code MILE40 at manscaped.com. Thank you for tuning in to the Mile 40 podcast. I am Bishoy Tadros, the author of Break Barriers and Audacious, both of which are sold on Amazon. And I invite you to join me as I engage with guests to discuss those bounce back moments that we encounter on our personal journey. Mile 40 is a forum to learn about how athletes, professionals, and leaders of all backgrounds stare down moments in life where the only option is to rise up. The Mile 40 podcast strives to remind listeners that the comeback is always greater than the setback. Welcome back to another episode of the Mile 40 podcast. Thank you all for continuing to tune in. The guests just keep getting better and better. I am so incredibly fortunate for them, for their time, and for you, the listeners, for your support. If you haven't already, please be sure to hit subscribe if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. Check out the show notes. There's a discount code for picking up a copy of Break Barriers or Audacious. And do me a solid, give us 5 stars. The reviews go a long way. Really appreciate it. Today's guest is a special guest. I have Matt Christopherson. He's the co-founder of OpScotch, a modern health company. They provide access to cutting-edge tools, premium products, along with unparalleled knowledge and support to improve overall health. This, combined with OpScotch's vibrant community, sets a new standard for health innovation. With a background in kinesiology from Simon Fraser University, experience as an international athlete with Canada's national water polo team, he combines his academic insights and athletic discipline to lead and foster lasting health solutions. He's been recognized for his leadership across various boards, contributing his unique expertise to health, finance, and business. What started as a simple idea, pushing beyond limits and inspiring people along the way, grew into Project 125. It's a legacy of support to help athletes facing health adversities beyond the finish line. In September 2014, Matt ran 125 kilometers from Vancouver to Whistler, becoming the first ever and sole runner of the RBC Grand Fonda, North America's largest cycling race, further exemplifying his commitment to health advancement, making a meaningful difference, and enduring impact. Matt, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, my man.
Of course, man. Oh, your bio just gets me jacked up. I cannot wait to learn all about this. I like to kick off every episode by making sure the audience just has a little bit more insight into your upbringing, childhood, where you grew up, and just kind of laying the land there. So why don't you just give us a quick little start with regards to where life began for you?
Yeah, happy to. Well, thanks for having me. I'm stoked about this pod right now. So Yeah, I grew up Vancouver, Canada. That's on the West Coast. Born and raised, still live here today. And yeah, had a great childhood. I ended up, sport was always part of my life. Early days, I was a swimmer, and then that evolved to water polo. As you mentioned, I was on the Canadian national team. I traveled the world as a youth and junior athlete. Went to Worlds, Pan American Games. Yeah, it was something that was really like the big focal point of my younger years. And then ended up going to university for kinesiology. Yeah, I was very academic and had the opportunity for a full ride scholarship as well. And that led into entrepreneurship. And yeah, a couple different businesses in a couple different industries. And full circle back in the health and wellness industry where I find my roots.
I love it.
So,
I do want to ask. I mean, so I went to Vancouver once. I ran the Lululemon Seabreeze half marathon out there a couple of years ago. That was my one venture out into Vancouver. First of all, it's beautiful out there. Vancouver is definitely one with nature, and it definitely stood out to me. I am wondering, can you tell us a little bit more about what life is like generally? Like, what's the community like out in Vancouver? How would you
yeah,
describe it?
for sure. Well, the community is definitely very active. It's not your typical big city, right? So it's not like Chicago or New York or even Toronto for that matter. It's a lot more laid back. We are West Coasters. So if you put the parallel between New York and LA, like we do gravitate to that West Coast kind of feel. It is actually the city that Lululemon was founded. So that is one of the many wellness companies that were founded on the West Coast in Vancouver, alongside several others that are very notable. And yeah, we're just pretty laid back lifestyle, very active. And we have water and we have the mountains. And so we have all the different sports and all different seasons. Glorious city to run in. We have the seawall, which is about 30 kilometers long, right along the water throughout Vancouver. And so it's just an epic city to enjoy every season, but most especially in the summertime.
Amazing, amazing. And so, you dipped into your resume. I talked about your profile. Sports was clearly a part of your life from the very beginning. Let's talk about when the love affair started. Let's talk about how we transitioned into water polo, a sport that, not everywhere is really that popular to begin with. But when you watch it on the grand stage, you can tell how special of a sport it is. So tell us a little bit about how things began there.
Yeah, so I guess it's probably important to mention that I was born an identical twin.
Mm,
So, as an identical twin, competition was part of our DNA. When you're constantly compared at a very young age, I can even remember back to like 4 years old, and you're getting compared. Whether that's in any kind of athletic endeavor, any academic endeavor. Yeah, that was part of it. So I think that was really what was ingrained at an early stage to really excel, right? It was like, okay, you got to constantly can be compared to your brother, and then you got to try to outperform him or outshine him to try and get on the podium. So when we were young, we were skiers. We had the mountains in our backyard, Whistler being one of them. Whistler's only an hour and a half away from Vancouver. And then we were swimmers, and I swam at an early age. That was something that my parents put us in. And then, that was no different than Canadian hockey and other sports. It's like early mornings and like every day of the week, all through the weekends, swim meets through the weekends. And as that evolved into my teenage years, I got tired of swimming laps. It became very monotonous for me, pretty boring. I did excel at it. I was a very fast swimmer. But then that was an easy lob into water polo. So more team oriented. It was more physically demanding. Those listeners that aren't aware of water polo, it's kind of like basketball and water. A lot of players are, all of them are over 6 feet, typically, 6'4", 6'5", or taller. Height does make a difference. Size makes a difference. And then, of course, speed. So it is kind of like basketball and water, although it's set up, to emulate more like soccer with the nets. But yeah, that's what really was our focus and my focus through the later teens and then into my early 20s when I got the opportunity to swim for Canada and compete internationally. Yeah, super fortunate to, visit a lot of cities and travel a lot from sport, which I'm immensely grateful for.
How long were you and your brother on the same trajectory for?
Yeah, it was all the way through our teens, actually, academically and from a sport perspective. And it was always like just back and forth a bit, whether that be grades or, awards, even making the team and then getting cut and, bounce back and forth, kind of like a ping pong a bit.
Got it, got it. No, that's really I'm fascinated by that. I know a bunch of twins out there, and um, I'm always fascinated by at what you guys are identical. You said right?
Identical, yeah,
Yeah, I'm
yeah.
always fascinated. Like, at what point do like the identities diverge, and do
Mhm.
you start to kind of take your own path? And is there any sort of you know, I think resentment is a strong word. I imagine that your brother is happy for you with regards to the success that you've had. I don't know. Maybe we'll go there if you want to go there. But I do always wonder about that, and how that's handled within the context of the twins.
Yeah, I think it really obviously depends on the individuals, of course. For us, I think it just came with maturity, right? And there's always going to be, that inner child that we all have, the trauma as young, early on years in our life, where not feeling seen or heard, or like
Yeah,
those other like emotional trauma, the baggage that we can carry that can really impact our relationship later on in life, because yeah, that does come in the way of our egos and what have you. But I think as we matured as adults, into our 20s, we both found our own path, and you start venturing off to into your own individual passions. I think that's kind of when we went, like in our own different directions. But again, like as a twin, you are, you see the world through a very similar lens, right? You've gone through all very similar experiences as children, as teenagers. Yeah, so you do have a lot of parallels in life, even to today. I'm in my 40s, and I'd say, like, majority of our life we've spent, looking through a very similar lens, right? So
yeah. So Canada's national team. Did you get to the Olympics?
did not.
Okay.
I ended up quitting before Canada qualified for the Olympics. Although, admittedly, I am just about 6 foot. I did not have the size from an international perspective, to really compete at the Olympics, I'd say. But yeah, many of my teammates did compete at the Olympics. And yeah, it was just a pleasure watching them perform at that international stage.
Um, you talk about competition earlier and how that may have spurred your passion for sport. But I want to dig into on the individualistic level, like you yourself, your relationship with being an athlete. I think there's a maturation process that we tend to go to when it comes to sport. I've experienced it myself. A lot of people that I've had on the podcast, I've talked about, and I think you realize the older that you get, there's a certain tranquility and a certain level of peace that comes from just overall your relationship with getting better individually at sport, your relationship with being better than you were yesterday, your relationship with improvement, and in a team capacity, your ability to lift up those around you, your ability to mentor others and pave a path for others. Um, can you talk to me a little bit about where you were back then versus when we're going to get to where you are today? But let's talk about where you were back then versus where you are today as it pertains to your relationship with the world of sport.
Yeah, what a good question. When I look back and I look at my late teens and my early 20s, I don't think that there was that maturity there, or the self-awareness, right? And that just comes, in my belief, through experience, the desire to grow and grow as an individual. And yeah, looking back, I didn't have the maturity that I have now, the awareness to lead properly, the experience through business, even that it can transfer into sport. I think it's, skills are transferable, whether it's from business to sport, sport to business. And yeah, I wish I knew what I know now, and have that desire to lead compassionately. Yeah, just the level of self-awareness that one has now to really support my fellow team members like I do, to champion them as humans. I think early on, when we haven't fully matured, it's a lot more selfish, and there's you're driven to succeed, and you're not, and compete against others to make the team. Whereas there's so much more to leadership, which I'm aware of now, that you can prop other people up and still have that same success or greater.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. And I think it's really, really insightful, especially when we reflect again on some of the things that you've done. Because when I think about running 125 kilometers, that takes a certain kind of human, not just physically, but mentally.
Hmm.
And so let's talk about the buildup now. Let's talk about the years in between. When did you put water polo aside, or did you just
I
how did
did,
you? Yeah,
yeah. After I went to Worlds, I hung up the speedo, and that's that was kind of the end of the career, my early 20s. Yeah.
got it. And was it a smooth transition from there?
Yeah, like I think there was a little bit of heartache. It was kind of the end of an era, right? Something that I excelled at and worked really hard at. In my early teens, it was something that I was relentless on making the team. I was a lot smaller than my teammates, and so it was a testament to hard work and dedication that got me there. Having said that, after leaving the sport, there was like uncertainty of what I wanted to do, and that void, of that passion, that was filled with probably going astray a little bit, venturing in my 20s in the clubs and chasing girls, and yeah, kind of falling on the wayside a bit. I think my internal competition was, used in other means, and then it kind of refocused. Then it refocused, and I geared back into business, and that's where my passion really thrived in my mid 20s.
Well,
So
I'm glad you opened up that door because um, we should go there a little bit with regards to who you were as a human outside of sport,
yeah.
and some of the ups and downs of that period. I think that a lot of times we see and we come across people that were successful in the world of sports, such as yourself, and then we forget like there was a human behind there. There was someone who was
Hmm.
probably dealing with personal adversity, or just had just the ups and downs of whatever life was throwing at them. So, talk to us a little bit about who you were from that side of things.
Yeah. So, throughout my high school years, I ended up getting straight A's, graduated top of my class, had unconditional scholarships across the US and in Canada. Ended up staying local, went to university, at a university here in Vancouver. Nonetheless, I had friends in high school who I was really close with that, were led astray. And they were having income from illicit means, and they were making a lot of money in our early 20s. And that competitive nature in me, after I hung up water polo and left the sport, I found myself at university being like, how are these friends making this kind of money at such an early age when I outperform them on all these other levels, whether it's academic or in sport or what have you? And that led me down a path of, alternate means of making money. Um, Something that I look back now and shaped me for the person that I am. But for several years in university, I didn't have a job. I was making money by other sources, and yeah, it wasn't until a couple years later when my parents put it on me, and they're like, "Matt, we know that you're up to no good. Although you're going to university, like, how are you affording a house, a car to pay for your university, and like any kind of like endeavors and travel and what have you?" And it was the tough love when they stopped talking to me. And that's when I recognized that I wasn't aligned with my values, those values that were ingrained in me at a younger age. And that competitive nature took me off track. And when I was able to refocus and really sit back and understand what was important to me, which was family, I realigned myself and I came back. And rather than using that competitive, innate ability within me for like, I don't know, for the all intents and purposes, like doing wrong, I could come back and then use it as a force of good. And that's what led me into entrepreneurship. Started a couple companies, and then now as a force of good to make an impact on other people's lives, which led to Project 125 and running 125 kilometers for a friend who's a two-time Olympian, Olympic champion, and a mother of two that was just diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and needed the support to raise money for some leading edge treatment.
Wow. The businesses that you started, we don't need to go into super depth about them, but quickly talk to us a little bit about um, uh, the start of the entrepreneurial journey, what industries you were involved in, and where you left off with them.
Yeah. So in Vancouver, known for it's like the mining capital, public markets, mining capital. Started off in the capital markets. Someone took me under his wing, and I learned about venture capital. Doing RTOs and go public transactions, and then that led me into the cannabis industry. Actually, in fact, the cannabis industry was only legalized in 2018 in Canada. However, 15 years ago, a friend of mine had just started a company which was harvesting equipment for the space, whereas then you don't touch the plant. So you're not actually doing anything illicit. And asked me to come on board, ended up becoming a partner. And we were a 3-person team in a portable down by a river, and we were in our mid 20s, and we grew that company year over year, like 40% growth, no outside capital, just young entrepreneurs at heart, and put in all the right systems, infrastructure, and built an incredible brand in that emerging sector. We rode the wave of the cannabis sector. um, I was super fortunate because of that, early entry. Ended up building a strong reputation, a good understanding of the industry. Founded a couple other companies within that industry. But then, after the course of a decade, I recognized that cannabis wasn't my thing. I wasn't a consumer. I wasn't really tracking the industry at the speed at which it was going and advancing. And that's when I refocused and I like circled back, and it was a full circle moment getting back into the health and wellness space. It's something that I was deeply passionate about and rooted in from a young child in sport.
It's fascinating to hear you talk about this because you're not you're you carry yourself with grace and humility. But I feel like if I was in your shoes back then, I'd be one cocky SOB.
Well, maybe I was back then. I'll tell you that. Like it was like, you know, cannabis, especially in the illicit world,
Yeah.
it had a little cachet about it, right?
Yep.
And it had an edge to it.
Yep.
Whereas there was only a certain type of people that ventured into that space and that realm 15 years ago or longer. And yeah, I did have a little bit of arrogance and air about me. And looking back, there was that reason why my parents kind of had that tough love on me and stopped talking to me for the better half of like 2 years. Nonetheless, it was a lesson for me to grow up and just become more self-aware and understand, like, who I was as a person and the values that were important to me. But nonetheless, like, it was an incredible ride. I learned a lot from an entrepreneur standpoint, from building a business, but also about who I am as a person and how I can use my God given talents as a force of good.
Up until when you started to come back to your level of grounding and refocus on health and wellness and really hone in on what's important to you, what was your biggest, up until that point, what was your biggest trial or tribulation? Was it that period, through entrepreneurship, or was there any other period that really stood out to you as being, one of your more memorable moments of difficulty?
Yeah, there was a couple. There's a couple. I don't think anyone has a straight line in life. And there's just seasons and chapters which I went through. You know, in the teenage years, I think the hardest challenges that I had was in sport. Getting cut from teams and then having to get back on the horse and try again, and having that dedication to the sport itself, that I was committed to making the national team. So that was one era. And then in my 20s, it was definitely going down the wrong path, going astray, finding different means of income, and yeah, just that era of Matt, there was its own adversities and tribulations. Having said that, I think one of the hardest points in my, you know, 40-year life, I'm 43, was about 4.5 years ago. I think there was a level of maturity in me, and I was seasoned from a business perspective. I've cut my teeth in a couple businesses, and I still went through an immense amount of adversity. And I had over close to 40 shareholders in my private business, and it was very turbulent. There was a lot of headwinds within the cannabis industry, scarcity of capital. Everything had fallen off from a valuation standpoint, and yeah, I was left dealing with a lot of disgruntled shareholders. I was questioning my self-worth, like torn relationships and friendships. It was just a dark couple years, and I didn't know my worth, and I didn't feel worthy of of like being here even. And just put a lot of question marks, and a lot of sadness, depression. And I think that was the most troubling years of my life so far.
Was that the first time in your life where you had to question your capability as a leader or as a someone in position of authority? You know, again, I think everything goes back to your bio, right? Like, you look at your bio, and everyone in their bio screams success because that's what a bio is. But what you scream is you scream um, leader. You scream leader in various capacities, whether it was in sport, in business. And so I have to imagine this experience 4 years ago, you probably had to question yourself and question, your self-worth, which you kind of alluded to, but I just wanna
Mhm.
make sure, like, that was the case.
Yeah, big time. And looking back, it was one of these things where I didn't ever feel it was going to end. I didn't know how I could take the next step forward. Right. There was times that I couldn't get myself off the couch, in sadness, in self doubt. Like, I doubted every move. I was second guessing every single message, every email. It was like everything was fractured, right? Confidence was completely diminished. And yeah, it just took a lot of support. I was super fortunate to be surrounded by other entrepreneurs. I'm part of a couple different entrepreneur communities, and I've built those friendships. And fortunately, it's part of the journey, and I was fortunate to have those people to remind me of that, to remind me of like the good days are only so long and so are the bad days. And so, having those daily reminders that this will come to an end and the sun will rise is something that, was instilled on me, and it did. It eventually did. But it took a lot of time.
Hey, Mile 40 fam. Are you craving a social life without the hangover? I'd encourage you to join Zero Proof. It's a lighthearted community diving into all things connection, lifestyle, and fun without the drinks. From wellness tips and product highlights to real life stories and every way to have a blast beyond the bar. Zero Proof has you covered. Be a part of the Zero Proof movement and take your social game up a notch. It's honestly one of my favorite newsletters. I'm going to put the link in the show notes for you all. Check it out. And if you enjoy it, tell them that Mile 40 sent you over. Again, check out Zero Proof. When you think about what made you successful in previous businesses, and really in just general, like when you think about your core values, right? Is it the fact that you are like a relentless hard worker? Is it the fact that, you're incredibly grounded? Is it the fact that you can look at the bigger picture? How would you describe, your strength or your quote unquote secret sauce, if you will, to how you navigate adversity or navigate challenges?
Well, I think one of the biggest qualities that, perhaps like always, biggest strength, biggest weakness is my generosity. Super generous individual, and that leads to really fostering a lot of really close relationships. I'm always there for a friend, and they in turn are there for me. So I think that has really served me well over the years. And, when it looks at success as a whole, whether that's in sport or in business, one thing that I like to share with people is, there's hard work, there's dedication, determination, there's having a grandiose vision, one that's bigger than oneself. But people always say there's a thing of luck. And I do believe that luck plays a part, but it's about creating that luck, about putting yourself in the positions to be lucky. And I think that has been part of the magic sauce, if you will, that has put me in positions to succeed.
It's funny. It's funny how this works. My next question was going to be around what your relationship with luck is. And so you brought it up yourself. I mean, I don't think that I definitely don't believe that all of your successes is attributed to luck, but I do believe you're the kind of person who understands there's a little bit of luck involved in all
Mhm.
of this. And
But
attracting that
that
luck is a
that
big
luck
part of it.
doesn't exist. That
Yeah.
luck doesn't exist unless you put yourself in a position to be lucky, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. All right. So now we got the picture. Let's bring this back now to Project 125 because I know that's where a lot of this conversation is going to go. So you mentioned your friend who was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. Are they still with us?
Yeah, she is Krista Guloien. She's a two-time Olympian, Olympic silver medalist, diagnosed in March. I think it was March 9th, 2024, of stage 4 cancer, 6 lesions from her head to her waist. And yeah, that's what started it all. That's what the origin story of Project 125.
Got it. And was the 125 obviously named after the 125 kilometers?
So this is an amazing story, the
Tell
origin
us.
story of Project 125. So Krista got diagnosed. Sister puts up a GoFundMe for $5,000. Her family rallies behind her in discussions. And just for the sake of this conversation, I'll kind of fast track some parts. It was like, in order to raise money for someone that is, faced with the battle of cancer, we need to inspire people. Everyone has a cancer story nowadays, sadly. And so, what separates her from anyone else? Anyone else's aunt, uncle, parent, grandparent. And so I said that I'd run Vancouver to Whistler, which was 125 kilometers. It's an iconic route. Um, the RBC Grand Fondo is North America's largest cycling race. There's upwards of 10,000 participants every year. So it's in its 15th year. So I said that I'd run that same route. Anyways, nonetheless, after the GoFundMe was posted, Krista and her sister went down to Florida to receive some leading edge treatment for her cancer diagnosis. And the procedure was deemed successful. However, after the first treatment, it was determined that she would need an additional 1 or 2 more treatments. And so I asked her and her sister how much money we had to raise to afford to cover the cost of that. They said 125,000. I said, well, that's a coincidence. It's 125 kilometers that I would have to run. And, post the first treatment, they asked me, are you going to do this, Matt? Can you do this for Krista, for our family? The very next day I had that conversation while they were still in Florida. I was driving. This is going to date me. Top Gun anthem song came on. And I was pumped up and I sent them a message. I said, let's fucking do this. And as I pulled in to the coffee shop, 5 minutes later, I Googled how many days out I had, and it was 125 days. And and that was the origin story of Project 125. So to run 125 kilometers within 125 days and raise 125 grand.
Wow. Okay, so just for context for the listeners that are stateside, 125 kilometers is about 78 miles. So it's okay that it's great that you didn't name it Project 78 because you would have raised about 50,000 less dollars. So it's good that you didn't do that. But talk to me about where you were as a runner to that date. I mean, there's a difference between
Yeah,
being an athlete
so
and being a runner.
lifelong athlete, not a runner though.
Okay.
So at that point in time, I'd run one marathon, which was 14 years prior. I ran the 2011 Berlin Marathon.
Okay.
It's the only marathon to date, official marathon that I've run. Even the last time that I had done a 10-kilometer run was 14 years ago. So even though this was going to be a run, this is something I committed to run. I had my foundation of health, right? So I'm a big believer in proactive health, preventative health. I'm like lifelong athlete. I train regularly, strength training. And so I knew it wholeheartedly in the deepest part of my soul that I had the capacity to do something like this, even though my body wasn't, it was a bit foreign to hitting the road.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. So talk to us about the training.
Yeah, so the training, we ramped up quick. So, after I committed to running the 125 kilometers, Vancouver to Whistler, it was about 2 weeks later that the founder of the RBC Grand Fondo, the cycling race, he contacted me unsolicited and he asked me if I would be willing to bump up my training by a couple of weeks to be the sole and first ever runner of the Grand Fondo. So it wasn't actually set up for me to do the Grand Fondo originally. It was a couple weeks in. So this means that we had to shorten the window of training to 100 days.
Yeah.
So so it limited me immensely.
100 days,
So
Jesus, that's like 3 months. Most people take 4 months to train for a marathon. Like that's
for a
a
marathon,
third
and
of
this is 3 marathons.
yeah, 3
right?
marathons.
Uphill.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I actually hired an ultra marathon coach. She's recognized as world-renowned 2-time world ultra marathoner of the year. And she, signed up. We were conversing. She agreed to do it. And it was about a week in. And she said to me that she didn't have the capacity to support me to be successful. I believe she didn't think that I could do it and ramp up in that short period of time. So nonetheless, I was left without a coach, but I knew that, with my experience in the sport, that I could put a program together, and execute to the best of my ability in that short window. So for those listeners that know anything about running and marathon training, typically you would have long distance runs every week. You would have interval training runs. You would have pace runs. There'd be an array of different sessions you'd have throughout your weekly programming. Well, because I was limited for time, I had to rest my legs. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to forego any of the pace training. And I'm going to forego any of the interval or hill training. What I'm going to focus on is strictly the long distance runs. So that's what I did. Every weekend, I stacked runs. I did a long run on Saturday and another long run on Sunday. And I did that week over week by increasing my distance around 15% every week.
How far did you go up in mileage?
So at the end of it, my peak was 54 kilometers on Saturday and 48-ish on Sunday. So for
Oh, wow.
context for the listeners, that would be, well beyond a marathon the Saturday, and then hitting a marathon on the Sunday.
Wow. Okay. Wow. Um,
Mm-hmm.
talk to me about, and I was just talking to someone about this, right? Like, I remember my very first marathon, and I remember how um, the last 6, 7 miles were like 90% mental. Like, like that was pure will at that point for my very first one. And now that I've kind of built myself up, I know a little bit what I'm doing a little bit more. Now, like getting to those new PRs or getting to those new levels, that's a different level of mental. That's, almost just as high with regards to how much you need to invest to get there. When you think about your race, the 125 kilometers, I'm very tempted to say 78 miles, but the 125
Good,
kilometers,
good. I love it.
right? When you think about that, and you think about the fact that it's uphill, in particular, and you're smart because you have the background in the world of athletics, and you know how to train. Um, talk to me about how much of it was pure will, when it came to the
Mm-hmm.
actual race.
Yeah, well, let's backtrack too a little bit. This was done, so 1,900 meters of elevation. What's that? That's like 8,500 feet, I think. So yeah, it was a climb, and it was done throughout the night. So because I was integrating to the cycling race, they left Vancouver at 7 a.m. and the pro riders, people from all over the world, come in and fly in and race this cycling race, and it's iconic. And they would leave at 7 in the morning on the Saturday, and the pros would finish at around 9:50 in the morning, so close to 3 hours, just shy of 3 hours. So because I needed to finish and cross the finish line at between 9:20 and 9:35, then I had to backtrack and I had to depart Vancouver at 2 p.m. on the Friday. So what this did is this left me being running in complete darkness, and there's like no
Yeah.
road lamps.
Oh,
So
wow.
I was in complete darkness for like 8.5 hours. So it was not only the grueling fact of doing an ultra and like, 3 marathons in one stint and going uphill, but it was doing it by myself in the dark. I had a friend that flew in. She's from Virginia, and she flew in, and seasoned triathlete, done several Ironmans. And she reminded me, she's like, Maddie, I've done these distances. I've done this sort of thing in the dark, but this is solo. I didn't have any other racers around me. I had no pacers. I had no other like checkpoints, none of that. That was me in the pain cave by myself in my thoughts. So that was another level of like, relentless focus that required to do the run itself.
That's incredible. I mean, yeah, that's beyond
Hmm.
incredible because, um, at at that point, what do you even like, you're so committed, like, what are you even proving to yourself at that point
Yeah.
that you're out there
Well,
by yourself?
dude, you know what? Even when I was training for this,
Yeah.
I'll share this with the listeners. The Canadian Sport Institute, it's an environment for all our Olympic athletes. They came on board to support me. They represented and supported all our medalists at the Olympics this past year. And when they were doing some testing and I was doing my running economy testing, understanding my body's ability of what most efficient pace I should be doing this at and how fast I was burning through carbs and calories, they said to me, they're like, Matt, I think you're underestimating the difficulty of this feat.
Undertaking, yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like, I don't think so. They're like, no, no, no. Let me frame this for you. We represent all our pro athletes. Every marathon, every pro marathoner finishes the race. Every pro ultra runner does not finish. You are doing this by yourself with limited support, with no pacers, with no other racers. This is incredibly challenging. And it was only 3 days out of the run that this was put on me. And then it was like, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, wow, this is a big undertaking that I kind of underestimated.
How did you fuel?
Fueling during the run, it's something that was introduced to me, this term called palate fatigue. didn't know of a thing. But when you get those ultra distances, your body and your actually your palate cannot absorb. You're not craving
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
So we had an array. So Morton came on as a sponsor, so I had Morton gels. Nonetheless, I had yams with brown sugar. I had pancakes with brown sugar. Anything to get maple syrup. In the course of it, I had 6 Fantas and I think 9 Cokes throughout. So it came to a point when it's just whatever my body would tolerate, whatever my palate would accept is something that I would consume. So I had an array of things in my support vehicle. And we would just make sure that we're managing 50 grams of carbs every half an hour is what we were doing.
Yeah, you remind me of we had another ultra runner come on, Christopher LaMagna, and he talked about the phrase was nibble nibble sip sip. That's
Yeah.
basically how he got through uh his fueling throughout his ultras. And that
Oh, I
phrase never.
remember later in the run, I
Yeah.
remember I was like, "Give me a Fanta." I was telling my support team,
Yeah.
"Give me a Fanta." It's like, "No, no, no, you need something solid." I'm like, "You know what? I don't care. I want the Fanta.
Yeah.
You give me the Fanta right now. Like I'm craving that."
Yeah.
And so, it was a compromise, Fanta plus a little bit of solids, but
Yeah.
yeah, it was just a mixture of everything throughout the whole run.
That's amazing. Man, so much we can dig into, but what I really want to get into is the introspection now. You reflect on it, right? Um, and you learned what you already kind of knew what you were made of, but you probably learned a lot more about yourself out there.
Mhm.
You reflect on it now and you realize that um you're just so capable as a human, and I think that's usually one of my favorite findings when I bring on people like yourself, and when we tell stories, it's the fact that you're human, I'm human, a lot of the listeners well, all the listeners to the show are human, and a lot of times, as individuals, we don't really know what it is that we're capable of, and we sell ourselves short, and we say we can't, and, we abide by this narrative of those kind of feats are built for those kind of people.
Mhm.
And
Uh,
yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
this resonates well because I'll tell you, there was so many people that projected on me that that I couldn't complete this, that I didn't have enough time to train, that I'd injure myself, that we won't be able to raise that amount of money in the short window, that we wouldn't be able to integrate into the RBC Grand Fondo cycling race. Like there was people injecting these of their opinions and their beliefs because they've never done it. And the one thing that I knew in the deepest part of me is that I was capable of achieving this, and it was a matter of how I was going to get there. And to your point, looking back, like reflecting, the gold happens after the fact, and like mining for that. And I knew about 10 days into my training that this run was beyond just building like a mission to build support for athletes beyond the finish line. It was beyond supporting Krista and her immediate health needs. It was a run for redemption. It was this redeeming my own self-worth and self-love that was compromised 4 years prior. And I only recognized that after committing to it. But as I ramped up my running week over week, putting one foot like forward after the other, right? It was about redeeming it, and there was no way that I wasn't going to complete it. I had unwavering belief in myself that no one was going to get in the way of this, and it was just me against my thoughts. And I was visualizing myself cross that finish line and getting there September 7th.
Well, now that now that it's been done, usually I think there's when I think about what happened to me, and I told you about my mile 40 moment before this and how mile 40 happened for me. I remember crossing that finish line, and I remember, you know, at that point, again, people are still projecting thoughts on you. They probably are wondering, "Wow, like this guy's a maniac," or like, "There's, he's probably done after this. He'll never put himself in that position again." But deep down inside, I remember feeling this feeling of like, "Holy crap, I can do just about anything." Like
Mhm.
I can do anything I set my mind to. I felt empowered, if anything. I felt awakened. And I didn't voice it. I didn't tell people what I was feeling. I almost wanted to hold on to it because I felt like I now had a secret secret weapon, if you will, that I didn't want people to know about. That, I'm more capable than you thought, and I'm more capable than I even thought. And what I'm proud to say that kind of turned into is things like this show, where now, like, I want people to know from that lived experience that they are more capable than they probably think that they are. And from what I see that you're doing, I can tell that you've used your own experience to empower other people as well. Um,
Amen. Amen. And to inspire people, like I couldn't have said it any better. I really believe that it's our limiting beliefs that get in our way. Like I feel the empowered, just like you shared, how like it's unlocked. There's nothing that we can't achieve as humans. If you can dream the improbable, if you're fueled by a bigger purpose beyond your own personal achievement, you can achieve anything that's possible. Anything's possible. So I firmly believe that. I have this mantra: be the fuel for support, be the fuel for others, be the fuel of inspiration, be the fuel of transformation. Like, be the fuel. And that's, if you're fueling something, if you're fueling others, something much bigger than oneself, then yeah, you can really achieve anything, I believe.
Absolutely. Matt, the second time you did it on this show, but you did it at the perfect time. Usually where I close off and how I round things out is I ask people about their mantras. I ask people to talk to me about how they would tie their whole story up, whether it be the name of their book or something like that. And you did it perfectly. So I think that's honestly the perfect place for you and I to round out. And I want to make sure that as we close this out, you know how grateful I am for you for coming on, for letting us in on your personal journey, walking us through how you built all the different pieces of your life together, and empowering us to understand that we are very capable as humans. And if a human has done it, then we can do it. And that's really what it comes down to. So I just want to thank you for coming on and sharing that with me today.
Yeah, thanks so much. I've loved being here and I can't wait to do it again.
You got it, my man. Thank you. Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed this episode of the Mile 40 podcast, go ahead, subscribe, leave a review, and share the word. Thank you for being a part of the Mile 40 family. And let's unite in showing the world that comebacks are always greater than setbacks.